The call came at 8:13 on a Monday morning. By 8:20, three engineers were standing in a wet field, staring at 12 feet of grass like it had personally insulted them. Because that skinny strip of land, that ugly, forgettable little slice nobody wanted, was now the only thing standing in front of a $50 million highway. And the man who owned it? He was the same man they laughed at 23 years earlier, back when he paid $8,000 for it. $8,000 for a piece of land so narrow. One banker actually leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Some people really do pay for problems." The room laughed. The old man didn't. He just signed the paper, folded it once, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, like he already knew something nobody else did. And maybe he did, because 23 years later, the people in suits weren't laughing anymore. Now, they were asking the same question over and over again. Why did he buy it? And a worse one, what happens if he doesn't sell? Pause. Because this part matters. At first, nobody thought it was serious. That's what made it dangerous. When the survey crew found the parcel line, they assumed it was a clerical issue. A typo. An old county map that hadn't been updated. Some dead owner's forgotten paperwork. That's usually how these things go. A phone call. A title search. A check. Problem solved. But by noon, the title office had confirmed it. The strip belonged to one person. No liens. No co-owners. No probate mess. Just one name. Walter Hensley. Age 71. Mailing address. A white farmhouse 6 miles north of town, right past the grain silos and the boarded-up church with the broken bell. And when one of the younger project managers looked up from the report and said, "Who is Walter Hensley?" the bank's regional vice president went quiet. Not confused. Not curious. Quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you a story already exists. And nobody in the room is going to like the ending. Walter Hensley wasn't the kind of man people noticed unless they needed something from him. He drove an old tan pickup with one dull headlight. He wore the same brown jacket until the cuffs looked polished. He chewed peppermint discs instead of gum. And when people talked too fast around him, he had this habit of lowering his chin and rubbing his thumb across the side of his index finger like he was sanding a thought smooth before he answered. He lived alone. Always had a thermos with him. Never seemed in a hurry. If you passed him at Miller's Feed and Grain, he'd nod once, maybe twice if he knew your father. He wasn't rude. He just didn't waste words. People in town said he was stubborn, but that wasn't exactly true. Stubborn people push. Walter didn't push. He waited. And there's a difference. You have to go back to understand why a man like that would spend $8,000 on a strip of land barely wide enough for a pickup to breathe. Not all the way back, just far enough. Spring of 2001. The bank was liquidating a failed farm subdivision outside town. It had been a dumb project from the start. Some developer from 2 counties over had convinced First Valley Bank that the old Marsh Creek farmland could be chopped into executive rural estates. Big lots. Fancy entrance. Stone sign by the road. People in loafers love naming dirt. The developer borrowed hard. Then, the housing market hiccuped. Then the road work estimate doubled. Then the investor money dried up. And just like that, the dream collapsed into mud, weeds, and unpaid notes. So the bank did what banks do. They took it all back. Then they held an auction. Not a glamorous one. No champagne. No polished paddles. Just folding chairs in a stale room above the local branch, a coffee urn in the corner, and a stack of plats nobody in town trusted. Walter wasn't even there for land. At least that's what most people assumed. He showed up in work boots with dried mud on the heel, sat in the back row, and kept his cap in his hands. A few men recognized him. A few didn't. One lone officer whispered to another, and both of them smiled. Walter had history with that bank. Not the kind written in brochures. Years earlier, when corn prices dropped and diesel spiked, Walter's younger brother Dean had tried to hold onto the family acreage south of town. Dean was the talker. Walter was the worker. That was the arrangement. Dean met with lenders. Walter fixed fences, rebuilt bearings, stayed out until dark. But when 2 wet seasons hit back to back, the numbers broke. The bank extended credit once, then tightened, then demanded more collateral. Then, according to Dean, changed the terms in the same breath they promised patience. Patience is cheap when it's not your land on the table. By the time the foreclosure notices came, Dean was already sleeping in his truck some nights, just so their mother wouldn't hear him cursing in the kitchen. They lost 80 acres first, then equipment, then the south barn. Walter never forgot the day the bank manager stood in their gravel drive with polished shoes sinking into mud, explaining portfolio risk, while his mother stared at the lilac bush and said nothing at all. That silence stayed with him. So yes, when Walter walked into that auction room in 2001, people noticed. The bank noticed most of all. They assumed he came to watch, maybe to punish himself, maybe to witness the final insult. What they didn't understand was this. Walter had spent 32 years working county road maintenance. Ditches, culverts, right-of-way lines, drainage easements. He knew how land looked on paper. But more importantly, he knew how it behaved in real life. Where water sat after a storm. Where trucks could actually turn. Which worthless corners became priceless the moment asphalt got involved. And buried in that auction packet was a parcel so thin and awkward it looked like a printing error. 12 feet wide. Just over half a mile long. Running between a rail easement on one side and a shallow flood basin on the other. Most people saw weeds. Walter saw a throat. A bottleneck. A choke point. The only stretch of dry, legally usable ground connecting the old county road to the state highway frontage without crossing flood-restricted soil. It was too narrow to build on, too ugly to farm, too inconvenient to notice. Until one day, somebody important would need to get through it. Walter didn't bid on the big lots, didn't touch the corner tracks, didn't go near the parcels with road frontage and billboard potential. He waited while men with tucked-in shirts and loud pens competed for acreage. 40,000, 62, 90, 110. Then the auctioneer got a parcel 14B. A few people squinted at their maps. One man actually laughed before the bidding even started. Is that a drainage ditch or a shoelace? More laughter. The auctioneer tried anyway. Opening bid, 5,000. Silence. He lowered it. 4,000. Nothing. Walter raised his hand. Not high. Just enough. The room turned. The auctioneer nodded. For 1,000 from the back. Then a bank attorney, maybe out of boredom, bumped it. 5. Walter answered. 6. The attorney smiled without warmth. 7. Walter looked down at the plat for a second. Then he said 8. That should have ended it. But the branch manager, Tom Bell, silver watch, bright teeth, the kind of man who likes speaking for rooms, leaned toward the attorney and said something that made him grin. The attorney lifted a finger. 9. Walter sat still. The room enjoyed this now. There's a certain kind of entertainment people get from watching a quiet man be tested in public. Walter took off his glasses, wiped them once on the edge of his shirt, put them back on, then looked straight at the front table and said, 8 was enough, and that should have lost it. Except the attorney hesitated, because deep down, even in a joke, nobody likes buying something they don't understand. He glanced at Bell. Bell gave a tiny shrug, and just like that, the bluff collapsed. The auctioneer waited. Going once. A few chuckles. Going twice. Tom Bell leaned back and said it. Some people really do pay for problems. Laughter. Sharp this time. Open. Walter reached into his coat, took out an envelope, and walked to the front. No speech. No comeback. Just $8,000 in certified funds. Paid in full. He signed, folded the deed, and left through the side door. That would have been the end of it. For most people, it was a weird little story from Slowtown Auction. One of those local legends told over coffee. Remember that old fool who bought the grass ribbon from the bank? But Walter did something strange after he bought it. He maintained it. Not perfectly, not like a lawn, but enough. He cleared volunteer brush every summer, kept the drainage open, restaked 2 corners after spring washouts. He even paid the tiny property tax every year, always early, always in cash. Nobody understood why. And after a while, people stopped asking. Life moved. Tom Bell got promoted. The bank financed a medical plaza, then a shopping strip, then a warehouse district on the edge of town. The county grew. Truck traffic increased. Developers started circling the old Marsh Creek area again because land near the highway had tripled in value. Walter stayed where he was. Same truck, same jacket, Same habit of pausing before answering. But here's the part nobody saw. He kept every paper, every plat map, every county drainage sketch, every right-of-way update. Every time the planning board changed a transportation corridor line, Walter clipped the notice and slid it into a folder. Green folder, rubber band around it, labeled in black marker. South access. He wasn't obsessing. He was waiting. And waiting, if you know what you're waiting for, is a form of power. 23 years later, the power finally arrived wearing reflective vests and carrying state-funded ambition. The project was called the East Spur Connector. Publicly, it was pitched as a traffic solution. A new 4-lane route linking the industrial expansion zone to Highway 8. Safer freight movement. Less congestion downtown. Regional growth. That's the language they used. Clean language. Expensive language. But behind the banners and renderings, the real engine was private money. Warehouse contracts. Distribution deals. Bank financing. And sitting behind a lot of it was First Valley. Same bank. New logo. Sharper website. Same appetite. The total build-out was expected to top $50 million. Not all at once. Roadwork, grading, utilities, frontage improvements. Enough money to make people speak confidently before anything existed. The engineers mapped the cheapest route. The county liked it. The investors loved it. There was just one problem. The cheapest route crossed 12 feet of land that didn't belong to them. 12 feet. That was it. Not 12 acres. Not a whole farm. 12 feet. You could jump over that distance in gym shoes. But legally, it might as well have been a canyon. The first offer came polite. A young acquisition consultant drove out to Walter's farmhouse in a Navy SUV and laid the envelope on the porch table like it was good news. $60,000. For land Walter bought for $8. Not bad, right? That's what the consultant said. Mr. Hensley, that's a very fair return on an unusable parcel. Walter looked at the number, then at the consultant, then out toward the fence line where two starlings were fighting over something invisible. He let the silence breathe a little too long. What makes it unusable? The consultant blinked. Well, I mean independently. It has limited standalone utility. Walter nodded once. So useful. Just not to me. The consultant smiled in that thin, professional way people do when they're trying not to be annoyed. We like to move quickly. Walter folded the offer back into the envelope. No, that was all. The consultant actually laughed a little, thinking maybe this was bargaining. Would you like to make a counter? Walter stood up, took his thermos, and said no. Door closed. Meeting over. The second offer came a week later. $200,000. Then $350. Then $600, with a relocation bonus attached for no reason anybody could explain, because Walter wasn't living on the strip. That's when people started to notice. Because banks don't keep increasing offers on land that doesn't matter. Local rumors spread fast. Some said there was oil. Some said Walter had blackmail on a county commissioner. Some said the state could seize it any time anyway, so he was a fool to resist. Maybe, except the state didn't seize it. Because this wasn't as simple as the press release made it sound. The connector was being built through a public-private structure, and several pieces of land still had to be acquired voluntarily before the environmental permit phase could close. Miss one piece, and the whole timeline slips. Miss the timeline, and grant money gets shaky. Miss the grant window, and investors get nervous. That's when nervous people start making mistakes. Walter knew that too. Did he know every legal detail? Probably not. But he knew enough. Enough to say no. Enough to make no feel heavy. Then the pressure changed shape. The friendly consultants disappeared. In their place came lawyers. Letters. Deadlines. Language meant to sound final. Notice of intended acquisition. Notice of corridor necessity. Notice of valuation review. Walter laid every letter on his kitchen table beside the green folder. Then he called one person, not a big city firm, not some television lawyer with slick hair. He called Ruth Alvarez, 58, local, sharp as cut wire, used to handle farm title disputes and drainage conflicts nobody else wanted. Ruth had a dry voice and the habit of tapping paper with the back of her pen when she found something interesting. She came to Walter's house on a Thursday afternoon, sat at his table, and read in silence for almost 40 minutes. Walter didn't interrupt. Finally, Ruth leaned back and said very softly, "Well, that's annoying." Walter looked at her. "For them or me?" She almost smiled. "For them." Here's what she found. Years before the connector was announced, the county had preserved a drainage and maintenance relationship across adjoining parcels. But Walter's strip remained separately deeded, fully taxable, and never absorbed into any public easement. Meaning, they had planned around him on paper without actually owning what they needed in reality. Worse than that, one of the adjacent parcels financed by First Valley carried access assumptions in its valuation that only worked if Walter cooperated. In plain English, they had been counting on his land before they had his permission. That's not just sloppy. That's expensive. The next meeting happened downtown. Conference room. Glass walls. Cold water in little bottles nobody drinks. On one side sat bank reps, project council, county transportation staff. On the other side sat Walter and Ruth. Walter wore the brown jacket. Same one. He placed the green folder on the table like a lunch pail. Tom Bell was there too. Older now. Thinner through the face. Still polished. Still try to own rooms that no longer belonged to him. When he saw Walter, there was a flicker. Recognition first. Then discomfort. Then the practiced smile. "Mr. Hensley, it's been a long time." Walter looked at him for a beat. "Not for me." You could feel the room notice that line. Bell cleared his throat. They started talking numbers. 900,000. Then 1.2 million contingent on immediate signature. Ruth didn't touch the paper. She asked questions instead. About corridor certification. About access dependency. About wetlands mitigation. About whether alternate routing had been costed honestly or just dismissed because it hurt the bank's margin. That room changed slowly, like temperature leaving a body. People who entered confident began checking with each other before speaking. Walter said very little, just listened. Then Bell tried one more tactic. The old one. The one powerful people use when money stops working. He made it personal. "Walter, let's be practical. This isn't 2001. Holding up regional infrastructure over an old grievance doesn't help anyone." Old grievance. That phrase just sat there. Small. Ugly. Too neat for what it meant. Walter looked down at his hands. Rough hands. Hands that had fixed engines, buried dogs, lowered his mother into the ground. Then he looked up. His voice was calm. So calm it forced everyone else to hear it. "This isn't about a grievance." He tapped the folder. "This is about you deciding what mattered when it was cheap and pretending it still doesn't matter now." Nobody moved. Bell opened his mouth. Closed it. Ruth slid a document across the table. An alternate engineering review. Independent. Stamped. If the connector was rerouted around Walter's strip, the project could still proceed. But it would require retaining walls near the rail edge, additional culvert work, and a design delay that would push total cost up by roughly $9.4 million. Maybe more. And there it was. The thing hidden inside 12 feet of grass. Not magic. Not mystery. Leverage. Pure, patient leverage. Bell stared at the paper like it had betrayed him. One county official whispered, "You've got to be kidding." Ruth answered for him. "No, your clients were." After that, the offers changed again. Now they were serious. 1.8 million. Then 2.4. Walter still said no. And this is where people split. Because some viewers are going to think, "Come on, sell it. Take the money. Win and go home." That's fair. Most people would. Maybe most people should. But Walter wasn't measuring only money. He was measuring something older. Tone. Memory. Weight. What people thought they could do to him because he was quiet. Because he wore old boots. Because he wasn't in the room where future maps got drawn. And once you understand that, his next move makes sense. He made one demand. Not a ridiculous one. Not revenge dressed up as policy. He said if the route crosses land, First Valley had to publicly fund a farm access road for 3 families that would lose direct field entry under the original plan, and the bank had to issue a formal statement acknowledging wrongful treatment in past foreclosure conduct investigations tied to the Marsh Creek lending period. Not a confession of illegality. He knew better. Just acknowledgement. Responsibility with its collar loosened. The bank refused. Of course they did. Money they could handle. But memory? Memory on paper? That was intolerable. So the standoff continued. Weeks turned into months. Construction crews sat idle on scheduled segments. Steel prices shifted. Subcontractors threatened to reallocate equipment. County meetings got tense. Investors started calling people at home. And for the first time in a very long time, men who spent careers dismissing slow rural people as obstacles had to organize their lives around one of them. There's something almost biblical about that. Not because Walter was a saint. He wasn't. He could be hard. He could be cold in the way only wounded people can be. But he understood a truth powerful institutions often forget. Delay is expensive. Humiliation is interest-bearing. By late summer, the story leaked. Local paper first, then regional business press. Then everybody had a version. Farmer blocks highway. Tiny parcel stalls major project. $1 million strip. But the headlines missed the real hook. The story wasn't that a man got lucky. It was that he paid attention when nobody else did. That's a very different kind of power. The final meeting happened in September. No reporters. No press statement waiting outside. Just decision time. Bell came in looking tired now. Not polished tired. Beaten tired. Like a man who had been explaining the same failure upward for too many weeks. He sat down across from Walter and didn't bother with the old charm. Last offer, he said, $3 million. And limited infrastructure assistance to the neighboring farms. Not the full acknowledgement. Not even close. Ruth looked at Walter. Walter didn't answer right away. He unscrewed his thermos. Poured coffee into the cap. Took one sip. Set it down. That little pause felt bigger than the offer. Then he said no. Bell exhaled through his nose. Almost a laugh. Almost anger. Then you're really willing to stop the whole thing. Walter shook his head. No. He leaned back. You are. That was the moment. Not when the money went up. Not when the maps came out. That sentence. Because it put ownership back where it belonged. On the people who assumed a quiet man was supposed to disappear when progress arrived. The project board voted 12 days later to reroute. They had to. Grant timing, litigation risk, public optics, none of it worked anymore. The new alignment curved south along the rail edge, added structural retaining costs, and pushed the opening back by 14 months. By the time the connector was finished, total cost had swollen far past the original $50 million projection. Nobody put Walter's name on the ribbon-cutting sign, but everybody knew. Truckers knew. Surveyors knew. County staff knew. And the bank definitely knew. Because right there, near mile marker 2.1, the road made an unnecessary bend around a long strip of unremarkable grass still owned by Walter Hensley. People started calling it Hensley's Curve. Not officially. Officially, it was Segment C South Realignment, which is exactly the kind of dead language institutions use when they lose to a human being. Walter never got rich from the land. That's important. He didn't walk away with 10 million. Didn't become a folk hero in a new truck. He kept the strip. All 12 feet of it. He leased a small corner for utility access years later and used some of that money to replace his roof and fix the farmhouse porch. That was about it. When people asked why he didn't take the millions, his answer changed depending on how well he knew them. Sometimes he'd say didn't need it. Sometimes they were buying the wrong thing. Once, according to Ruth, he said the truth in the plainest way possible. They thought I was selling dirt. He wasn't. He was deciding whether their convenience was worth more than his memory. And to Walter, it wasn't. Tom Bell retired 2 years after the reroute. No scandal. No dramatic downfall. Just a quiet retirement note and a plaque. That's usually how systems protect themselves. They don't collapse. They absorb. They rename. They move on. But regular people remember differently. They remember the laugh. They remember the auction room. They remember the old man in the back row with the envelope in his coat. And maybe that's why this story travels. Because most people know what it feels like to be dismissed by someone wearing confidence like armor. To say something true and watch the room smirk. To understand the value of something only after everyone else has told you it's worthless. That feeling stays with people. Maybe that's why Walter's story never really left town. It just waited for the right listener. A few months before he died, a younger reporter asked him if he'd planned it all from the start. The reporter wanted a great quote. A mastermind quote. Something clever about revenge. Walter sat on his porch, looking out a fence post that needed fixing, and thought about it. Then he shrugged. No. The reporter looked disappointed. Walter noticed. Then he added, I just know there's a difference between land people laugh at and land people haven't needed yet. That's a better line anyway, because it reaches farther than property. Some people get underestimated the same way. Quiet people, slow people, people without polished words, people who don't look powerful in the room where the laughing happens. And every now and then, life turns. The map changes. The road moves. And suddenly the person nobody respected is the one standing at the only entrance that matters. That doesn't happen every day. But when it does, it's unforgettable. So no, this was never really a story about 12 feet of grass. It was a story about patience, about insult, about watching powerful people mistake silence for weakness, and about what happens when a man they ignored for 23 years finally gets asked the only question that matters. What do you want? Walter Hensley gave them the one answer they never prepared for. No. And sometimes no is non-negotiation. Sometimes no is a mirror. A final one, held up to the people who laughed when the price was small and panicked when the cost became theirs. That little strip of land is still there. Still narrow. Still plain. Still easy to miss if you don't know where to look. Which feels right, because the most important things in a story rarely look important at first. That's why people step over them. That's why they laugh. And that's why when the twist finally comes, it lands so hard. A bank saw a problem. A quiet man saw a future. And in the end, the highway moved. Not him. So here's the question. If you were Walter, and the people who mocked you came back 23 years later with $3 million in their hand, would you take the money or make them move the road? If you got an answer, put in the comments. Because honestly, that answer says a lot about a person.